Hi, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to check to see if you can hear me. Maybe just type in the box if you can hear me okay. Great, fantastic. Everyone can hear me. We can get we'll get going. Okay, so I am really happy to welcome everybody to the Accelerated Education Programming Experiences from Uganda webinar. We are very excited to present this webinar today to you all, and we hope that it will be an engaging session for you all as well. Just to get started, my name is Jessica Oddy. I'm a Research and Learning Advisor at Save the Children UK, and I'm going to be chairing the discussion for the next hour. Just to get some housekeeping out of the way, we have people joining us from all over the world and some bandwidth issues. So I would ask if everyone can please turn off their videos and also mute your microphone to minimize background noise. If you have any questions during the presentations, please post your questions in the chat area at any time. We'll respond to as many as possible. And we do have over 10 minutes designated time towards the end of the webinar to respond to these questions. We're really keen for this to be as participatory as possible. There's a wealth of expertise in this within the webinar today, so we're eager to hear from you. This session is being recorded, and the recording and presentations will be shared on the INE website. Introductions. Oh, sorry, I've gone backwards. Introductions and to what we're going to be doing today. We're going to start with a 10-minute introduction to give everyone a kind of global overview of accelerated education. This is going to be led by Martha. Martha is an education advisor for UNHCR and also chairs the Accelerated Education Working Group. We're then going to move into a short overview of Save the Children's research study around accelerated education and the kind of rationale and methods. This is going to be presented by myself before moving into a kind of deep dive into accelerated education in Uganda, which will be led by Lindsay and Leo. Lindsay is an education specialist for Save the Children in Uganda and provides technical education support for Save the Children's Uganda's humanitarian and development education programs. And Leo is an education specialist for two education consortia, which is Education Cannot Wait and ECHO Includes, and he'll be talking a bit more about what these consortia are doing around accelerated education. So without further ado, we're going to move into the first session, the first presentation, which is by Martha. And I hope you enjoy.
Hi, everybody. So as Jessica said, my name is Martha. I have 10 minutes to give you a global overview of accelerated education, so I'll try my best. But just to really give you a little bit of context, I think many of you are very familiar with the numbers of out-of-school children and youth. But there's around 263 million children and youth who are out of school, and we can see the breakdown here, including around 61 million children of primary school age, 60 million young adolescents of lower secondary school age, and then a huge number, 142 million youth of upper secondary school age. So we can see that out-of-school children and youth are a global challenge, but I think it's also important to know that it's a challenge that has been somehow recognized. SDG 4 has an increased focus on those affected by crisis and conflict, and it recognizes that we need a provision of multiple and flexible learning pathways and entry and re-entry points at all ages and all educational levels to cater for the needs of these out-of-school children and youth. And very importantly, it also places a lot of value on recognition, validation, and accreditation of the knowledge, skills, and competencies. There are many pathways for out-of-school students, and I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to just go through these very quickly, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Accelerated Education Working Group. But one thing that we worked on when we initially came together, we're trying to come up with some agreed definitions for accelerated education and for other programs that we felt were often confused with accelerated education. There are a multitude of pathways. These are alternative education pathways by any means, but these are just a few that we consider that often get confused with accelerated education. And we have bridging programs. Bridging programs support student success, such as taking language acquisition when students come from one language to another language, or existing curricular differences between a home and host curriculum, or entry into a different type of certified education. And we also have remedial programs. Remedial programs, I think you're very familiar with, but these are concurrent with regular classes. And these are really for students who are in school already, they're the right age and they're the right grade. You know, they're not particularly struggling as with the bridging program with the change of language or curriculum, but they just need support in terms of content or skill to succeed in regular formal programming. And then I think catch-up is one of the programs that's most commonly confused or mixed up with accelerated education. And catch-up programs, and this is defined by the Accelerated Education Working Group, are for those children and youth who have been actively attending school prior to an educational disruption. So these students are the right age, they're the right grade, they were in school before, and they've had an educational disruption, and they need some kind of support to enable them to transition back into formal education, and just an opportunity to learn the content missed because of the disruption. But they haven't missed out on a huge amount of education. And then we have accelerated education programs. And I just wanted to share the Accelerated Education Working Group's agreed definition of accelerated education. I think that you can read it for yourself, obviously, but just to pull out some key words. So accelerated education programs should be flexible. Accelerated education programs should demonstrate flexibility to meet the unique needs of the learners that they aim to serve. And this should be flexibility in relation to class schedules or location. And of course, the aim of accelerated education programs is to go faster. So they must run in an accelerated time frame. The aim of accelerated education programs is to reduce the number of years in a learning cycle and allow students to complete a certified equivalent level of education in a shortened time frame. And one of the key things is these accelerated education programs should target those who are out of school for a multitude of reasons. But one of the key things is these students should be over age and out of school. They can be out of school, they've never started, or they've missed out on so much education that they've become overage for their grade. But this is one of the key differences between students that are eligible for accelerated education programs and students that are eligible for catch-up programs. Accelerated education programs are specifically for over age and out of school children and youth. And then one of the key things that the Accelerated Education Working Group emphasize and is in this definition is that accelerated education programs should provide learners with certification, recognized certification, so that when accelerated education learners complete, they can transition. And we're going to look at transition in this next slide. So transition is, of course, a key aim in accelerated education. And when students and youth have completed an accelerated education program, they can obtain a diploma or certification that supports this transition to pursue either work or livelihoods or further education, including formal secondary education, higher education, for vocational training. I wanted just to briefly talk about the Accelerated Education Working Group. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the work of the Accelerated Education Working Group, but as you can see, it's made up of the organizations on the bottom of the slide. It's currently led by UNHCR, and in my role, I chair the Accelerated Education Working Group. And really, we began in early 2015. And we began because we saw that there was this proliferation of accelerated education programs being implemented globally. And there was just a widespread variation of how programs were planned, implemented, and approached. And there was really little or no overarching objectives or guidance, standards, or indicators for what effective accelerated education provision looked like. So in response to this challenge, this small number of education partners, as I said, these partners at the bottom of the slide, formed the Accelerated Education Working Group. And we can see we work in three main areas. These are our three main areas for 2019. Our overall goal is to improve the quality of accelerated education programs, and then you can read for yourself the three areas. So we have this area, the left-hand blue box, which is trying to really influence the quality provision through the development and dissemination of tools and guidance. And we have developed these 10 principles for effective practice, and you can find them on the INEE website. We've developed a whole, what we call a conceptual framework for what constitutes accelerated education, and these 10 principles are really the foundation. And we say that they're the 10 key components of any effective accelerated education program. And we also have developed a checklist based around the principles. We have an accompanied guide to the principles, and we've developed the definitions that I've briefly spoken about, a decision tree, and a learning agenda. And if you look at the blue box on the right, one of the other areas we work in is strengthening the evidence base for accelerated education, and this is connected directly with research projects such as we're going to present now, and also we have a whole learning agenda with themes that we'd like to collect evidence on. And then really these two areas overall contribute to this systems level engagement and uptake for quality AE, and these three areas contribute to improving overall quality of accelerated education programs. Just like to say that all of the Accelerated Education Working Group tools and guidance are available on the INEE website, and they're available in 4 languages. So they're available in French, Arabic, Spanish, and English. And then just to finish, I wanted to briefly talk about some of the global challenges of accelerated education. And I think these global challenges are all present in Uganda, and we'll hear more about this from Leo and Lindsay. But I think one of the challenges that we've seen is that often accelerated education is used as a catch-all program for all out-of-school children and youth. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, it's not appropriate for all out-of-school children and youth. It's appropriate for those who are over age and have been out of school for substantial periods of time. So I think we really need to see more attention being placed on the individual needs and the backgrounds of why these students are out of school and how long they've been out of school. And we need to have education programs that match their needs. I also talked a little bit about why the Accelerated Education Working Group first came into being, and really this lack of uniformity in implementation. We see a huge array of accelerated education programs being implemented differently in different countries, and often implemented differently within the same country. And I think this is primarily as a result of having no guidance until recently. And as I said, this was one of the main reasons the AEWG was created. And we have lots of examples of this, but a review by USAID that aimed to understand the landscape of accelerated education found that one of the fundamental challenges when they were conducting this research is there was such a wide variety of programs that constituted an accelerated education or called accelerated education programs, that it was very hard to gather any kind of evidence. A lack of specific accelerated education curriculums, I think that's common in the majority of contexts. Learners normally use the formal curriculum, but it's not accelerated or adapted to the needs of older learners, and that's normally the responsibility of teachers to do that. And that brings us on to the lack of specific AE teacher training. And the way that learners normally get through the curriculum only by using standard teaching and learning methods and not accelerated learning specific pedagogy. And also in most humanitarian or development contexts, most teachers are able to accelerate the learning by just contenting the curriculum, concentrating on basic skills and competencies, having smaller classes or allowing more time on tasks, but not through using accelerated learning pedagogy and not through using pedagogy that is age appropriate. And if you remember, accelerated education learners are mostly over age. And then just to jump into transition, I'll come back to the lack of evidence. Transition is another global challenge. And accelerated education students who do integrate into the formal system often drop out due to the hidden and actual costs of schooling. They often struggle with larger class sizes and less participatory teaching and learning methods, which often makes learners not want to transition into the formal system. And transition pathways are often not clearly thought through in the initial program design phase, with a lack of coordination between AE centres and formal schools, or lack of agreed equivalency between AE levels and grades. And then in many contexts, many transition pathways or transition options to such access to formal secondary school, vocational training or livelihoods are just not available. The second last global challenge, I think funding is a perpetual challenge. Accelerated education programs are mostly implemented in conflict or post-conflict crisis contexts, and they often have funding that is short-term emergency humanitarian funding, which is mostly 12 months. But it's very important that accelerated education programs should be funded for the whole program cycle to allow transition from one level to another. And then the last global challenge is this lack of evidence, the lack of evidence of what works and why within accelerated education programs. And there's very little knowledge about impact on access, retention, sustainability, and exactly which program components impact upon which outcomes. And lots of research has noted that more evidence is needed on the effectiveness of accelerated education, value for money for accelerated education, and a need for tracer studies to show what happens when students actually graduate or transition from accelerated education programs, so a tracking of students. So in a mission to strengthen the evidence base and contributing to the third area of the Accelerated Education Working Group, we'll now hear about the research in Uganda, and I'm going to pass you back over to Jessica, if I can work out how to do that. Let me. Oh, hiya.
Thanks, Martha. Fantastically done. So thanks for that, Martha. So in 2018, Save the Children commissioned a qualitative study to explore the factors that displaced children, parents and teachers and education stakeholders identify as supporting or hindering transition between accelerated education cycles and post-AEP opportunities in 3 refugee hosting locations in Uganda. From the onset of this study, using participatory research methods was a priority for the Save Children Country Office. At the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, Save the Children committed to promoting meaningful engagement with children and youth as a mandatory component of humanitarian preparedness and response. And in part, this draws from really listening to children contributes towards accountability to affected populations, and also just making sure that the service users, who are the children, have a clear voice in informing and shaping the programs that we implement. We also believe that participatory research methods can be an opportunity to capture diverse experiences of education and displacement, but also enable children to participate in and play an active role in decisions that will impact their lives, well-being, dignity, and protection. So we looked at supporting, we did the study with children, but we also engaged teachers and parents and communities. For today's presentation, I'm only going to talk about the methodology that we used with children. However, at the end of the presentation, we have a link to the study where you can find out more about the perspectives and techniques that we use with the parents and teachers. As I mentioned, the study took place in 3 different refugee hosting locations in Uganda. We had a total of 352 participants, including district education officers, representatives from different non-governmental organisations, and we used mixed methods, including key informant interviews and focus group discussions. However, with the children, we drew our inspiration from a fantastic tool which was developed by UNHCR several years ago, called Listen and Learn, participatory assessments for children and adolescents. And we thought it was a really great consultative tool that we adapted. Children were separated into separate workshops with girls and boys, and further divided into 2 age groups, so 10 to 14 and 15 to 18. And at the bottom of this slide, you can see the structured format of the consultations. So all of the consultations involved informed consent, an icebreaker, collaborating with the children to establish ground rules for participation, and then depending on the age range, there was a structured activity. So with the girls and boys aged 10 to 14, we did a puppetry role play technique, and then with the older groups, we did an activity called lifeline drawings. All of the sessions finished with a helping hands activities where children picked one of the issues that had come up through the session and thought about things that they could do within their community or as amongst their peers to address that issue, and also things that they thought should be prioritised by different education stakeholders involved in the response. All of the sessions are finished with a certificate of achievement, because we thought it was really important to show for the young people to realise how much we valued their time and input. From the study, we had some really interesting findings, which Lindsay and Leo are going to discuss in depth over the next 30 minutes. But maybe just the key things to pull out that from the study, 36% of the participants identified were unaccompanied and separated children. This is significantly high compared to the number of unaccompanied and separated children in Uganda. However, the AEP specifically targets the most marginalised students in the assessment area, so was representative of the students involved in those programs. Another note to say was that the students came from Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Sudan. And by desegregating the findings by age, gender, and by location, we were able to get a very nuanced insight into how young people experience AEP and transition in those locations. And so, bearing that in mind, I'm going to now pass on to Lindsay and Leo, who are going to talk more about how they use the research findings to shape and address some of the challenges that came up in the programme.
Great. Thank you, Jess. I hope everyone is able to hear us okay, and we don't have too many connection issues from Uganda side. Wonderful. I'm told you can hear me. Excellent. So let me advance the slide. I want to give a little bit of a context of the situation in Uganda before we dive more specifically into the primary education space, and then where AEP and the research of this, the result of this research is situated. So within Uganda, there are over 1.2 million refugees and asylum seekers as of February 2019. This makes it Africa's largest refugee hosting country. And Uganda has been impacted by 3 parallel emergencies from South Sudan, from Democratic Republic of Congo, and also to a lesser extent from Burundi. In Uganda, a settlement model is used rather than a traditional sort of camp model that many might be familiar with. In Uganda, when refugees arrive, they're allocated a portion of land to live on, and they have freedom of movement within the country. So this is both an opportunity but also a challenge because settlements are quite large and spread apart, which makes provision of services, particularly of education, a big challenge. Overall, there are currently 12 districts in Uganda that host refugees, primarily in the northwest of the country and in the western and southwest part of the country. So it's important that we first understand a little bit about the opportunities and challenges in Uganda within primary education to then look at where AEP is kind of situated within the context. So in Uganda, universal primary education is mandated as of the Education Act in 2008. And this includes education for refugee children. This is not the first time that Uganda has been having refugees. There's a long history of very porous borders and families and children coming and going as conflict erupts and subsides. So refugee children are allowed access to all services in Uganda, including education. And within primary education in Uganda, there is no age limit. So anyone of any age could, if they desire, enroll in theory in primary education. So these are some of the opportunities. Some of the challenges within the refugee hosting districts are that currently the government and in the government schools, no additional money is given to schools for the refugee learners that are enrolled in those schools. Schools are only given money from the government through a capitation grant for the national children that attend. So though children have access, the schools aren't supported by the government to cater for those additional learners that are enrolling. Also, another challenge is that the government currently does not allocate teachers to schools based on the total number of children, which would include refugees and nationals. Teachers are only currently allocated based on the number of nationals in the school. So this is really where partners are coming in to support in primary education to fill in those gaps. Also, learning outcomes in primary schools across Uganda, not just in refugee hosting districts, are a major challenge prior to the refugee influx and continuing now. Only around half of the children at primary 6 reached the expected levels in literacy and numeracy, according to assessments done in 2015. So these are some of the opportunities and challenges. So then when we begin to look at accelerated education programs within Uganda, this gives you some of kind of the background, because most AEPs in Uganda across the various partners that are implementing accelerated education programs, most of them are hosted or co-located within formal primary schools. And this was done for sustainability purposes, also a better utilization of resources and support, supervision from head teachers of formal primary schools, also supporting accelerated education program teachers. But although they're hosted in primary schools, formal primary schools, AEPs in Uganda are considered non-formal education programs. And also, it's important to note that though primary education is universal and in theory is free, as Martha mentioned, is also a global challenge. There are many hidden costs of education, including various fees, buying uniforms, scholastic materials, examination fees, etc. Also, AEPs in Uganda are free of cost, as opposed to the primary schools where there are these additional sort of hidden costs. But we do have to factor in the opportunity costs that still exists for AEP learners in coming to school, and what are they missing, what work at home are they not engaging in, what additional income are they not getting because of their attendance at school. So this is also another factor that partners need to consider and have been considering. So I want to turn it over to Leo, who's sitting with me, so you won't see the presenter change, but this is my colleague Leo, and he's going to talk about some of the coordination and harmonization efforts within Uganda.
Hi everyone, thank you so much Lindsay and all participants. When you look at all these approaches being implemented in Uganda, the refugee setting, it needs a lot of coordination and harmonization efforts from every stakeholder. In Uganda, better coordination and sharing between all stakeholders has been a major priority in order to ensure a harmonized and joined up approach to ensure, AEP works out and education in general. Various funding opportunities like ECO and Education Cannot Wait have provided strategic emphasis on the development of education consortium. Consortiums for harmonized efforts within the education sector. Education consortiums within Uganda have spurred the development of accelerated education program guidelines for Uganda, with technical support from the Accelerated Education Working Group, as well as the development of nationally recognized accelerated education program curriculum by the NCDC. NCDC is the National Curriculum Development Center. Moving forward, accelerated education program specific teacher guides and pupil books are in process of being developed. When you look at the planning, from the perspective of planning, there has been education response plan. The government, both at national and district level, education partners, UN agencies, saw the need for an education-specific plan for refugees and hosting districts, in line with the comprehensive refugee response framework. Through a lengthy process, Uganda's ERP, or the Education Response Plan, was developed in September and officially endorsed and recognized by Ministry of Education and Sports. The plan sets out realistic, implementable, and costed activities to ensure improved learning outcomes for the refugees and hosting community children and the adolescents in the country. It includes the ECD, or early childhood development, formal primary, accelerated education program, secondary education. The plan is designed to be a 3-year rolling plan for the 12 refugee hosting districts, with each year that passes, the achievements, lessons learned, and challenges are reviewed, and additionally, the planning cycle is added. When you move forward to see how this is possible, government has been actively involved. The government of Uganda recognizes accelerated education program as a valuable contribution to the education system, thus its inclusion in the ERP. They also participated in the development, the review, and even the forthcoming approval of the AEP guidelines for Uganda. As Martha referenced, until recently there were no AEP guidelines, and the AEP implemented in the refugee settlements in Uganda varied widely in design and implementation. The government of Uganda, through the Ministry of Education and Sports, supports in building capacity of stakeholders to interpret the AEP curriculum. They also participate in the process of recruiting AEP teachers and conduct monitoring and support supervision of the AEP centers. When you reflect on the research that Jess talked about, now let us look at what the AEP research findings and challenges from this current report show us. Perceptions of the purpose of AEP differs between education actors and communities that AEP serves. Several agencies stated that AEP was primarily a way to get overage learners up to speed to enable their transition back into formal system. But children did not mention being overage and did not even see transition back into primary school as feasible option. Communities agreed that there are very few sustainable livelihoods and learning opportunities in the areas where they live. They feel the age criteria of 10 to 18 years established in the Accelerated Education Program guidelines for Uganda are too rigid and discriminate against older individuals since there is no age limit for education primary. The communities also recognize that parents play a critical role in the success of AEP, highlighting parent roles in supporting children's education. Nevertheless, some parents inhibit their children's education through making them work during school hours, prioritizing boys' education over girls, and not even seeing the value of education. I want to take you back to Lindsay so that she can share more about the learner's perspective.
Thank you, Leo, for that overview on some of the findings regarding communities. I'd like to speak a little bit about what the findings indicate specifically regarding learners. So in the research, the participatory research that was done, all the children stated that once enrolled in AEPs, they did not want to transition back into the formal primary school system. And this was due primarily to the fact that that fails to take into account some of the socioeconomic barriers that may have contributed towards them enrolling in or maybe even dropping out of the formal primary system and later on getting back to school and enrolling in AEP. So expectations of them transitioning back into the formal primary system failed to take into account that cost that we talked about earlier, the hidden costs of education, of scholastic materials and examination fees. So all of the children spoken to didn't feel that was the best option for them. However, 100% of both boys and girls, they said that post-AEP, however, they would like to transition to secondary education. That was very clearly a desire that they had. However, they recognized, and even all respondents within the research recognized and highlighted that in the settlements, this is what they said near impossible due to the lack of secondary schools and the fact that few international NGOs are currently supporting post-primary opportunities in Uganda. So within AEPs, as well as in the formal primary education system, school dropout is still very high, especially for girls. And we saw this evidence in the research done here as well, indicating a higher dropout rate for girls within AEPs than for boys. And some of the significant barriers to school attendance and retention were in fact teenage pregnancy as one of the barriers, as one of the factors. But 83% of teachers did state that AEPs were welcoming to child mothers. They saw it as a welcoming program and a welcoming space. However, 100% or all of the teachers, they also stated that girls were most at risk of not completing AEP due, as we said, to factors such as early marriage and pregnancy. So although AEP centers are open to receiving child mothers back to learning, and it's clearly within the project scope and the emphasis, some of them, the girls still fear stigma, particularly coming into the formal primary school system where most of the AEPs are at. Some of the stigma around being either pregnant or a child mother, and also the fact that they don't have adequate child care to take care of their child while they attend school. So the research then also, in terms of gender differences, did indicate also a difference in performance between genders, but also between different subjects. For example, with social studies and science scoring higher than in mathematics and English. Also from the data, it's clear that there's a huge underrepresentation of children with disabilities within the AEP centers. And I think the reason for this really needs to be further examined and discussed. And some of the discussion needs to be had around whether or not this current AEP model within Uganda and maybe even globally, if the approach is the most appropriate method for schooling for children with disabilities. So when we look also at the, continuing on then looking at some of the teacher findings and challenges, one of the key issues that teachers raised was that they struggle in keeping pace with the accelerated nature of the AEP curriculum that has been finalized through the National Curriculum Development Center. And if you will see on your slide, AEP in Uganda is organized into 3 levels, with level 1 condensing the curriculum and the content that would normally be seen in primary 1, 2, and 3 of the formal education system. And then level 2 is condensing P4 and P5, primary 4 and 5, and level 3, primary 6 and primary 7. So really in level 1, there's a huge rate of acceleration and a lot of condensing of content. And when you look at this, when children entering in level 1, many of them are lacking the foundational skills that we would need in terms of listening, speaking, reading, and writing in order to be able to tackle that level of acceleration and condensing. So the language and literacy needs of refugees are really profound, and also they're compounding and on top of already existing challenges and confusion around language and literacy within the Ugandan education system to begin with. So in the early years of primary school, in the formal system, mother tongue is meant to be the language of instruction, with a transition to English as the language of instruction in primary 4 and above. But in a multilingual context, such as in the refugee hosting districts, where, for example, one classroom may have 6 different mother tongue languages that are spoken, it's really a challenge to teach and build those basic literacy skills when you have such a multilingual context. And teachers are not trained in terms of how to do this within the Ugandan primary teacher system. So 50% of teachers interviewed stated that language is a huge challenge, particularly in level 1. So in order to deal with this challenge, partners had developed a role called the assistant teacher role, which was really to meet the need of the lack of Ugandan teachers that are able to speak proficiently some of the languages that are spoken by the refugee learners. That was creating a barrier within the classroom and the learning process. So the role of assistant teacher was created both in primary, formal primary, and in AEP at the beginning of this current refugee response in order to provide additional support within the classrooms. So these individuals, ideally, they're refugees themselves, and they speak the languages that the school has identified as needing support. However, the role, unfortunately, is really poorly understood, and this sort of idea of an assistant teacher within the classroom supporting and providing that support role does not exist currently within the Ministry of Education framework of what's done in the formal primary schools. So there's a lot of questions around the sustainability of this type of language and literacy support. And there's also sometimes a bit of a dilemma around providing this additional support for AEP when already the formal primary system is overburdened. So those are some of the questions around that role. I want to turn it over to Leo, who's going to talk about some of the ways forward that we as a country program and within consortiums have been working and are planning to work to address some of these challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. For issues identified by the communities, we are working with a whole school approach to ensure that formal primary and accelerated education are supportive environments. This also includes such things as providing transition kits to return to formal primary and easing economic barriers to primary education by exploring opportunities for cash transfer. To address the lack of livelihood and learning opportunities that was mentioned earlier, education consortiums are mapping existing opportunities and harmonizing efforts towards more integrated programming across the education spectrum. This includes advocating for more non-formal and secondary or vocational opportunities. Parent and child participation is being emphasized through active participation in creation and planning of the school improvement plan alongside the school administration. Regarding ways forward with issues identified by the learners, we are working to ensure learners are well placed in AP to bring about the highest likelihood of their success and minimize the risk of dropping out. Placement assessments are being developed by partners to ensure a harmonized approach to placement within the different AP levels. We are also advocating for increased focus on secondary school provision as we map the education transition pathways that are currently available. We are conducting tracer studies to see what the medium and longer term outcomes for AP learners are. Well, as a consortium, we are also advocating for full inclusion of child mothers in both AP and formal primary to district authorities. And we are also seeking opportunities to incorporate community-based approaches to child care and support to child mothers into program design and budgets. Lindsay, I want to make you continue.
Yeah, additionally, regarding this idea and concept of a whole school approach, within consortiums, we're also planning and supporting resource materials around double shift school system, around how to do a double shift school system within formal primary schools to better support access and quality with the limited resources. And this, as I referenced, has included developing guidelines for double shifting in primary settings. We've also been supporting both the AEP and the primary, hosting primary schools to have school-based child protection systems and referral pathways. So what we were finding is that some of the AEPs were tending to be more protective and more supportive of learners than the hosting primary schools were, and this was creating a discrepancy between the two. So we're really working within consortiums to see that this is addressed within the whole school approach. We're also incorporating and using more child participatory methods within the referral system and within the child protection process, including, as Leo mentioned, involvement of children in the school improvement planning process to begin with, so they can begin to identify what are the issues and challenges within their school and what are the ways that we collectively together can improve them. We've also really been focusing on gathering evidence and data regarding the basic literacy and numeracy skills that we're seeing in AEPs, and how to better support developing these particular competencies through specific teaching strategies and ongoing continuous support of teachers, particularly for those most vulnerable in level 1, where a lot of the language and literacy and skill gap is seen. And regarding the differences in performance on certain subjects and between genders, I think this really needs more closely collecting and analyzing data to really get to the bottom of why this is and what the disconnect is. So part of this has been developing more harmonized approaches to the end of year assessments that are done at each AEP level, so that learners, we're sure they're achieving the competencies before they advance to the next level, so that we're sure that they can be successful in the next level, or in the case that they transition to formal primary. As is the case now, most schools and districts are doing their own thing. So we're trying to work in our consortiums and with our connections through the National Curriculum Development Center to make sure that things are really joined up and aligned. We're also really advocating at district levels to make sure that examination barriers that might hinder AEP learners to participate in the final primary leaving examination process, that those barriers are lifted and removed, and the AEP learners are really advocated so they can fully participate in the final examination of primary education. And regarding the children with disabilities and inclusion of them within AEP programs, we are currently collaborating within the Education Cannot Wait consortium of 13 partners with humanity and inclusion to find ways to better support the inclusion of children with disabilities in both primary education and within accelerated education. For teachers, in order to better support language and literacy, at the national level, there's been a formulation of a language task team that has formed underneath the Education in Emergencies Working Group. And as a task team, we're really working to develop better guidance for teachers to effectively teach in a multilingual context. And this will be, these resources are developed so as to be very practical and very hands-on, with hopefully documentation of what works best through video footage that can be shared with other teachers so that they learn from one another. We're also working on developing through a consultancy a short-term language bridging program that's currently under works, as well as how to provide remedial language support. We're piloting some approaches currently within the ECHO consortium, education consortium. So partners are also working on more closely defining the roles and expectations around the assistants or the classroom aides that are currently within the education response in order to have a harmonized idea of what these additional support resources in the school, what they're providing and what they're doing. We're including literacy and numeracy assessments in our baselines and endlines and within ongoing progress monitoring, and finding ways to better support teachers to do continuous assessment practically within large class sizes. Also, in terms of accelerated education specific teacher training, within our consortiums and also led by Save the Children, we are developing AE specific and have been piloting throughout the last year AE specific continuous professional development opportunities focused on overaged learners in particular and methodologies that work best for the overage population, particularly those whose skill level might put them at what would be equivalent to a P1, P2, or P3 level, but whose cognitive level of maturity is obviously quite a bit higher. And finally, from me, in terms of ongoing and future research, I can't speak too much into detail about some of these here, but Martha, as a resource at the AE working group, could be a good connector to some of these other ongoing research that are happening. But within the current work in Uganda, as I've mentioned, we're really working to try and gather better evidence and data within both of the large consortiums that are here in Uganda, of which Save the Children is the lead, and ECHO Include and the EPW consortium. But I do also know that PRIO and NRC are in collaboration around with the AE working group around a randomized controlled trial of accelerated education within Uganda, and that War Child Holland is also doing research on AE and their implementation of Can't Wait to Learn, the tablet-based learning game in both numeracy and literacy, and how the uses of technology impacts accelerated education. Also, the EU-funded project called BRICE, B-R-I-C-E, is also doing some research related to well-being and how accelerated education programs and TPD, teacher professional development, contribute to student and learner well-being. And they're looking at the experience of learners and teachers in the AE program. I think that's all from us. I'm going to turn it back over to Jess, the very last slide, and invite your questions or comments, please. If I can find you, Jess. Sorry, I'm searching for you. Excellent.
Hi, I think, can people hear me? Maybe I can just present this slide. Seems like we can't hear Jess. This is just a little slide to, oh, there you are, Jess. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. We're now down to, I was just talking to myself. Sorry about that, everyone. Just to say that no doubt some of the challenges and successes that we've heard today through the presentations resonate with the context and interventions where you're working elsewhere. We have had quite a few questions, and because we have just a minute left for the webinar, I don't think we're going to have time to answer them today. But what we can do is post the questions on when we post the presentation and with some of the answers. The key things maybe to take away is that there are a plethora of resources available on the INE website under the Accelerated Education. If you'd like to read more about the report that we did in Uganda and see some of the tools that we used, that's also available. And also the Education Response Plan for Refugees and Host Communities in Uganda that Leo mentioned is also available. I'm sure Martha is the Accelerated Education Working Group Chair. We're all really, really eager to hear more about accelerated education. So if you do have any questions around that, or if you'd like to connect with the kind of research and learning agenda, please get in contact with Martha and also Leo and Lindsay, who are working in Uganda on the AEP programming and with the consortium. And then if you have any questions about the research, my contact is available there. We are now at 3 o'clock and have used the full hour. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining, and we will review the questions and get back to you all as soon as possible. So thank you.